Why was she standing so still when the rest of them shifted restlessly? The dawn air clung cold and damp to every uniform on the grinder, but her stillness wasn't about the chill. Lieutenant Clare Donovan knew better than to fidget. In this place, movement was weakness and weakness was remembered. Still, the silence pressing against her skin was different from the silence that pressed against the others. For them, it was discipline. For her, it was doubt. She could feel it in the sidelong stares, in the careful avoidance of her gaze, in the subtle distance the other candidates placed between her and themselves. They were SEAL hopefuls, infantry, divers, warriors who measured strength in endurance and toughness. She was a medic. That word alone set her apart. They called her Doc, not with respect but with a dismissive curl of the lip, like she had wandered into a room that wasn't hers. The instructors barked names. The men answered loud, their huyas cracking the dawn. When her name was called, she raised her chin, let her voice cut steady through the air. The echo hung for a beat. Then silence followed, sharper than any laugh. She held steady. She had trained for this, years of trauma wards, dusty forward operating bases, pulling broken bodies out of wreckage. She had steadied hands while walls rattled from mortars, whispered reassurance to men as their lives poured out through wounds her fingers pressed shut. She knew chaos. She knew pain. But this place wasn't about medicine. It was about breaking you until only grit remained. The grinder had no patience for resumes. It had only sand, sweat, and punishment. Later that morning, the candidates jogged toward the obstacle course. The sun had risen, heat already lifting steam from the asphalt. Wooden walls loomed ahead. Ropes hung slick with dew. The instructors circled like wolves, snapping commands. One stumble from the first man and the whole group dropped to push-ups, palms grinding into grit. No one protested. Complaints were weakness too. Her hands caught the rope, burning instantly. Muscles screamed as she pulled herself upward, boots slipping on damp knots. Halfway up, her body shook. She tasted doubt bitter in her mouth. 30 pairs of eyes waited for her to fail, and then one more pull, then another. At the top, her vision swam, but she pushed through. When her boots hit sand again, no cheer met her, no hand on the shoulder, just silence. Yet in one man's eyes, a flicker of surprise. He'd expected her to fall. She hadn't. That would have to be enough. They ran miles, carried logs, dove into the surf where the Pacific smashed them into sand until it filled their teeth. She matched them step for step. If she faltered, instructors cut her down with words. "Pick it up, Donovan. This ain't med school." The men laughed at first, but days blurred into weeks, and her refusal to quit dulled their laughter into uneasy quiet. Still, respect hadn't arrived. Not yet. In the barracks at night, whispers spread like mold in the dark. "She's slowing us down. She won't last a week. She's only here because they want medics attached." Claire lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Each word was a nail hammered into her chest. She could have shouted back. She could have told them the truth, that she had steadied men's dying breaths in Afghan dust, dragged bodies twice her size out of burning metal, that she had seen more blood and chaos than half of them combined. But in this place, words didn't matter. Only actions did. And so at dawn, she met the grinder again. Push-ups until arms buckled. Sit-ups until stomachs burned like torn glass. Runs in wet boots that chewed through skin. When she faltered, an instructor leaned close, his words like a knife. "You think a stethoscope will save you when rounds are flying? You better prove you belong here, or you'll be on the first bus out." Her voice answered sharp, even as her lungs begged for air. "Huya, instructor." She rose again. The weeks dragged on. The bell clanged often, men stepping forward to quit to end the pain. Each clang echoed like a funeral toll. The men who doubted her looked her way each time, expecting her to follow. But she never did. She kept her silence, her steady pace. Slowly, grudgingly, the whispers shifted. "She hasn't quit yet. She's tougher than she looks." But respect still kept its distance. It came one night, not with applause but with a crack in the wall. After 18 hours of drills, soaked, starving, barely standing, one candidate collapsed. His chest seized. Panic rippled through the group. The instructors barked for order, but the moment teetered toward chaos. Claire dropped beside him, instincts faster than exhaustion. Hands steady, voice sharp. She checked vitals, steadied his breathing, snapped commands. Water pressure, stabilize. The others froze, watching her transform in seconds. She was exhausted too, but her focus didn't waver. Within minutes, he was conscious, alive. No one cheered, no one thanked her. But when the unit formed again, silence pressed heavier, different this time. Less mocking, more thoughtful. That night, lying on her bunk, she whispered the words she had clung to since the beginning. Patience, precision, endure, because she knew this was only the beginning. The ocean never stopped testing them. The surf punished their bodies, cold and merciless, until lips turned blue and lungs burned. The sand scoured their skin. The sun hammered down. But the real test wasn't water or exhaustion. It was silence. The men had each other, grins, groans, quick words in the trenches of fatigue. She had no one, no words of encouragement, no bonds. She carried the same logs, ran the same miles, dove into the same waves. But beside her, silence. Not cruelty, just absence. She was there, but apart. At night, she pulled off her boots, her feet raw and bleeding. She cleaned them with alcohol swabs, biting down against the sting. She had done this for others countless times, but somehow it felt lonelier doing it for herself. Across the barracks, a voice muttered, not caring if she heard, "She won't last. Already cracked, just waiting for her to ring the bell." Her hands trembled, but her face stayed calm. She would not give them tears. She whispered instead, softer than breath, "One more step, one more rep, one more breath." And she rose again at dawn. Each drill, each mile, each obstacle chipped at her body. Her shoulders burned as though molten lead had been poured inside. Her arms shook under the log. She fell, she failed, she got back up. And slowly, just barely, their eyes began to shift. When she stumbled, they no longer smirked. When she pushed herself past breaking, they no longer laughed. They didn't speak to her, but they were watching. And then came the fire pit. Sparks drifted into the night air, casting faces in flickering orange. The men clung to stories like lifelines, legends traded in whispers to keep exhaustion at bay. Clare sat on the edge of the circle, silent, listening. Martinez, scar across his cheek, eyes shadowed, leaned forward. His voice was low, conspiratorial. "You ever hear of the Ghost Division?" The circle stirred. Some scoffed, some smirked, but silence fell as he spoke. "A unit off the books," he said. "Missions nobody admitted existed. Operators who vanished into shadows, left nothing behind but silence." Claire's pulse quickened. She had heard fragments, whispers, but never this. Martinez's voice dropped further. "They say one of them made the record. 3,420 meters, over 2 miles. A shot that shouldn't have been possible. Wind, dust, heat didn't matter. He made it clean. Saved a team from being overrun." The fire crackled. Silence thickened. 2 miles, impossible. And yet no one dared laugh. Claire said nothing, but the number locked into her chest. 3,420. It wasn't about the bullet. It wasn't about the rifle. It was about the person behind it. The patience to wait, the discipline to steady, the focus to act when the world demanded perfection. She knew that language. It was the same language as medicine. A scalpel steadied when blood flowed. A tourniquet tightened against chaos. The others laughed nervously, moved on to other stories. But Claire held the number, repeated it like a prayer. 3,420. When the surf buried her, she whispered it. When her arms shook beneath the log, she muttered it. When her vision swam with exhaustion, she forced the number through clenched teeth. Each time it steadied her. Each time it kept her moving. What made her keep going when the silence was heavier than the weight of logs on her shoulders? It wasn't strength. It wasn't pride. It was that number, 3,420. She whispered it beneath her breath when no one was listening, tucked it into the marrow of her bones. 2 miles of impossibility. If someone somewhere could hold steady long enough to land that shot, then she could hold steady long enough to take one more step, one more rep, one more breath. The instructors never stopped pressing. Each day began before dawn, each hour a war against fatigue. The grinder claimed men by the handful. Some quit quietly, tears hidden by the salt of sweat. Others hurled their helmets down in anger before walking to the bell. Each clang echoed across the compound, a sound that rattled through every rib cage. For some, it was a funeral toll. For Clare, it was a dare. Not me. The ocean swallowed them again and again. Boots dragged heavy in surf, waves battering them until skin turned raw and lips went numb. The men leaned on one another, laughter mixing with curses when the instructors looked away. Clare had no such camaraderie. She moved like a ghost on the edge of their formation, present but unseen. On long runs, she matched their cadence but never heard the encouragements traded between them. No, keep moving. No, you got this. Only silence. Her throat scraped raw with thirst, but she refused to drop pace. Better to collapse alone than let them say she couldn't keep up. At night, her feet bled inside her boots. She cleaned the blisters with practiced hands, biting back groans. Once, a voice across the room said, "She's cracked already, just waiting for her to ring the bell." Another added, "Doc's wasting her time." They weren't whispers, they wanted her to hear. Her face gave nothing, but when the lights dimmed, her lips moved against the darkness. Ghost Division, 3420. The mantra steadied her more than sleep. The instructors tested them in silence too. One morning they laid rifles across the sand and ordered the candidates flat on their stomachs. Observation drills. Camouflage, patience, stillness. Hours dragged by while the instructors prowled the field, searching for movement, any twitch of a finger, any shift in breath. The sun baked the sand, insects crawled across exposed skin, sweat itched as it dried. For most of the men, stillness was torture. Muscles cramped, lungs fought for deeper breaths. Some broke, moving just enough to give themselves away. Clare found calm. She thought of the shot, the phantom sniper waiting hours in blistering heat, eyes burning behind a scope, body aching for relief that never came. She pictured the discipline it took to remain steady while lives hung on a trigger squeeze. She breathed evenly, let the pain ebb into the rhythm of her pulse. Patience wasn't suffering to her. It was medicine. She had learned it in field hospitals, pressing gauze against wounds while helicopters took hours to arrive. She had learned it kneeling beside fatting breaths, waiting steady, knowing panic solved nothing. When the drill ended, most men groaned, staggering upright, brushing sand from uniforms. Clare rose more slowly, every muscle aching, but her expression unreadable. Someone muttered just loud enough, "Doc," got ice in her veins. Not contempt this time, recognition. Days later, they put rifles in their hands. Clare wasn't new to firearms, but medicine had always been her weapon of choice. Still, when the sniper rifle was laid before her, sleek and heavy, something shifted. She adjusted the bipod, settled into prone, peered through the scope. The target blurred in the distance, heat shimmer making it dance. The instructor crouched beside her. Breath steady, don't yank, squeeze. Her finger hovered on the trigger. She wasn't thinking about the steel silhouette ahead. She was thinking of the number, 3420. What kind of steadiness did that take? What kind of calm? She exhaled, squeezed. The rifle kicked. A faint metallic ring followed a heartbeat later. She lowered the weapon. She wasn't a sniper, not like the ghost who had carved a legend across 2 miles of dust and wind, but she understood the philosophy now. Precision, patience, belief. The others noticed. She wasn't the fastest, not the strongest, but she was consistent. While others rushed and missed, she reset, breathed, and hit target after target. Martinez muttered one afternoon, watching her through narrowed eyes, "She shoots like she works, one cut at a time, no wasted motion." Some chuckled, but the edge of their doubt was softening. In the barracks that night, she whispered again, almost like prayer, "Ghost Division, 3420. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't even belief in the legend's truth. It was about what it represented, the possibility of the impossible. Every man here dreamed of records, medals, legacies. Claire wasn't chasing any of that. She was chasing resilience. If someone could steady themselves enough to make that shot, she could steady herself enough to finish this course. Hell Week arrived. Cold surf, hypothermia gnawing at bone, logs bruising shoulders, voices cracking as men linked arms in freezing water, forced to sing while their bodies shook. Instructors shouted. Bells clanged in the distance as more men quit. Claire whispered it through chattering teeth. Ghost Division, 3,420. Not as bravado, not as defiance, but as survival. Someone had faced worse. Someone had endured longer, and so would she. She staggered beneath logs, knees threatening to buckle, shoulders screaming. Each step became a meter, each breath another trigger squeeze. 3,420. And she stayed. They began to notice, not fully, not loudly, but in sidelong glances, in the way Martinez drifted closer to her during runs, in the silence that wasn't quite as heavy as before. She wasn't one of them yet, but she wasn't invisible anymore either. On a rare Sunday, Martinez caught her eye across the mess table. "You ever wonder," he asked casually, "if that Ghost Division story's true?" She chewed, swallowed, met his gaze. "Doesn't matter." The table stilled. Someone frowned. "Why not?" Her voice was quiet, calm. "Because it doesn't matter if it's real. What matters is believing it's possible." No one laughed, not this time. Martinez smirked, as if he understood more than the others. That night Claire lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the record, about how legends weren't really for the ones who achieved them, but for the ones who needed them. Maybe the shot was real. Maybe it was. Maybe Ghost Division existed. Maybe it was just a story to keep men from breaking when the cold and pain pressed too hard. It didn't matter. For Claire Donovan, it was enough. Enough to keep her steady. Enough to carry her through silence. Enough to remind her that resilience wasn't loud, it was patient. The next day, under the hammering sun, they lined up again. Sweat soaked their uniforms, dust rising from boots as they waited. Instructors barked orders, scenarios to simulate chaos, casualties, hostiles, smoke flooding the field. Mannequins sprawled in dirt, painted with blood, moaning from hidden speakers. The men scrambled, shouting orders, dragging bodies. Claire moved instinctively, kneeling beside a casualty, snapping for a tourniquet. Her voice cut through the haze, sharp and commanding. Hands obeyed. The bleeding stopped. Turner's voice snapped across the chaos. "Donovan, what the hell are you doing? We had it under control." She turned, sweat streaking her face. "He was bleeding out. You didn't have it." "This is combat training, not a damn clinic." His jaw was tight, disdain dripping. "Stay in your lane." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't bite back. Not with words, only with steadiness. The scenario pressed on, more smoke, more chaos, more simulated screams, and she kept moving. By the end, when the horn blared and the field fell silent, the men collapsed into the dirt. Turner broke the silence first, voice sharp, accusing. "You think this is some hospital rotation? You're slowing us down." Claire met his eyes. Her voice was quiet, calm, almost soft. "I saved 3 of your guys. If this wasn't training, they'd still be alive. Would you?" For once, Turner faltered. The silence that followed wasn't heavy with mockery this time. It was heavy with thought. Why did his voice always find her, even in the middle of chaos? Turner, broad, built like a tank, the loudest skeptic in the group since day one. When he snapped at her, it wasn't just words, it was a challenge meant for every ear within reach. And this time he wanted everyone to hear him. "Doc, slowing us down." The smoke of the field exercise still clung to their uniforms. The men sat slumped in the barracks, sweat-soaked, boots half unlaced, muttering complaints the way exhausted men always did. Turner's voice cut sharper than the rest. "She thinks putting band-aids on dummies makes her one of us." Laughter followed, bitter, sharp. Claire sat at the edge of her bunk, eyes fixed on the floor. Her hands rested still, knuckles pale where they pressed against her knees. She didn't answer. Not yet. Turner wasn't finished. Hell, next time we're under fire, she'll probably hide behind her med kit and wait for someone else to clear the way. More chuckles. Even Martinez stayed quiet this time, his scarred face unreadable in the dim light. Claire's chest rose slowly. Controlled. Her silence had carried her through weeks of training, but silence wasn't enough anymore. The following morning the instructors briefed them. Urban combat scenario. Mock village, narrow alleys built from stacked shipping containers painted to resemble walls and windows. Civilians, hostiles, casualties. Think fast, work together, don't fail. Smoke grenades flooded the air. Speakers blared gunfire and screams. The team fanned out, rifles raised. Chaos unfolded instantly, civilians collapsing in the dirt, mannequins groaning from hidden speakers, blood packs bursting with every simulated hit. Claire sprinted forward when she heard it. Medic, over here. She dropped to her knees beside a collapsed mannequin, sealing wounds, shouting for cover fire. Her hands moved steady, automatic. And then Turner again. His voice thundered through the haze, jaw tight with contempt. Donovan, you're dragging us down. We don't have time for your hospital games. The words carried. Heads turned. Doubt rose like a shadow. Claire's hands froze just for a breath. She felt the weight of their eyes. The instructors, unseen in towers, were watching too. And then quietly she whispered it, not to Turner, not to the others, but to herself. Ghost Division. 3,420-meter record. The sound barely carried, but in the lull of smoke and chaos it landed. Turner blinked. Martinez frowned. Another candidate muttered, "What the hell does that mean?" Claire lifted her eyes, calm, steady. "It means discipline outlasts doubt. Someone made a shot no one thought was possible. They didn't brag, they didn't shout. They stayed steady when it mattered. That's what I'll do." Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. The words sliced sharper than any yell. She turned back to the mannequin, finishing the bandage with crisp precision. "You can doubt me all you want," she said, still calm. "But when lives are bleeding out, you'll want me steady. And I will be." The silence that followed was louder than the simulated gunfire. The scenario pressed on. They cleared rooms, hauled bodies, exchanged fire with instructors firing paintballs from hidden windows. Sweat soaked them, nerves frayed, but something had shifted. When Claire gave an order, "Tourniquet now," or "Cover that corner," men moved without hesitation. Martinez covered her flank. Even Turner, scowling, kept pace instead of shoving her aside. The words lingered like smoke in the air. Ghost Division. 3,420. By the end, they collapsed against walls of the mock village, chests heaving, uniforms caked in grime. Instructors stalked silently among them, jotting notes, saying nothing. Finally, Martinez broke the stillness. He glanced at Claire, eyes narrowed but curious. "Ghost Division, huh?" She didn't look up from cleaning her hands, but the faintest smile touched her lips. "It's not about the shot. It's about proving the impossible is possible." Turner grunted, shook his head, but he didn't argue, not this time. That night the barracks was quieter. The men still muttered, but not about her, not in the same way. Turner lay back on his bunk, arms folded, eyes fixed on the ceiling, silent. Martinez hummed while cleaning his rifle, a grin tugging at his mouth. Claire sat at the edge of her bed again, elbows on her knees. Only this time the weight pressing on her chest wasn't just doubt, it was something else. She had spoken the words aloud, the mantra that had carried her in silence. Risky, dangerous, because SEALs didn't respect stories, they respected results. And yet the legend had seeped into the room like smoke, wrapping itself around them all. Lights out, darkness heavy. Martinez's voice floated across the silence. "Doc." She didn't answer at first. "You keep that Ghost Division thing in your pocket. Guys like Turner, they'll test you till the end. But if you stay steady like that, they'll have no choice but to follow you. She lay back, staring into the dark. Her lips moved silently, almost a prayer. Ghost Division, 3420. And for the first time, the words didn't feel like hers alone. The days blurred forward, exhaustion deeper, drills harsher. The instructors carved into them with relentless repetition. Ruck marches, obstacle courses, endless push-ups until arms felt like shattered glass. Turner still doubted, still scoffed when she stumbled. But when he faltered on a march, sweat streaming, face pale, she slid quietly beside him. She didn't speak, didn't gloat, just steadied her breathing and matched his stride. When his knees buckled near mile 15, she slipped a hand under his elbow just long enough to keep him upright. He jerked away, pride bristling, but he didn't fall, and he didn't quit. Later, cleaning rifles in silence, his voice was quieter than usual. "You didn't have to do that." Claire shrugged. "Neither did you." It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't friendship, but it was the first crack in his wall. A night navigation drill came next. Paired in twos, compasses in hand, checkpoints hidden across miles of terrain. Martinez walked beside Claire, whispering jokes in the dark. "Think the Ghost Division's out here watching us." She smirked faintly. "If they are, they're laughing at how slow we're going." Hours dragged. At one checkpoint they found another pair, one man hobbling, ankle twisted. Claire knelt without hesitation, binding it tight with a strip torn from her sleeve. "Shorten your stride. Lean on him," she instructed. The man's eyes hardened with determination. He pressed on. They weren't the fastest, but when that candidate limped across the finish, refusing to quit, whispers spread quietly through the barracks by morning. Doc got him through. She patched him up on the move. Respect still wasn't handed to her, but piece by piece, it was being earned. The real test came in the kill house. Wooden walls, narrow hallways, targets popping without warning. The team stacked at the door, rifles raised, adrenaline burning. "Move," the instructor barked. They burst in, firing, clearing. Midway through, Martinez stumbled, his boot catching. He fell hard, rifle clattering. In an instant, Claire fired 2 controlled bursts, dropping targets, then crouched to yank him upright. "On your feet," she snapped. He grinned sheepishly. "Thanks, Doc." They finished slower than expected, but alive. When the horn ended the drill, Turner muttered just loud enough. "Hell of a save." Not sarcastic, not mocking, something closer to acknowledgement. That night in the mess hall, the mood was lighter. Martinez smirked across the table. "Doc, if you keep this up, we're going to have to actually trust you." The men chuckled. Even Turner's lips twitched, almost a smile. Claire didn't laugh. She just ate quietly, but in her eyes the faintest flicker of satisfaction. Respect here wasn't a straight line. Doubt returned in shadows, a stumble, a hesitation, a misstep. Whispers followed, but each time Claire answered not with words but with steadiness, carrying packs heavier than her frame should bear, pushing through bruised ribs without limping, patching blisters without complaint. Little by little, the whispers changed. "Not she's slowing us down. But she doesn't quit. Not she's just a medic. But she's one of us." One afternoon, during rare downtime, Martinez leaned back in the shade, grinning. "Hey, Doc, tell us that Ghost Division thing again." She hesitated. "It's just a story." "Yeah," he shrugged, "but the way you said it, it stuck. Hell, I think about it when I'm about to quit. Makes me wonder what else is possible." Turner, sitting nearby, didn't scoff, didn't mock. He just sipped his water, eyes thoughtful. For the first time, Claire felt it, not just tolerance, not just silence, respect. That night she whispered again, not just for herself, not for survival, but for them all. Ghost Division, 3420. What happens when silence begins to shift, not from doubt, but from respect? The final weeks of training bore down with merciless rhythm. Days bled into nights. Pain blurred into routine. The instructors seemed determined to squeeze every ounce of weakness from their bodies, every drop of doubt from their minds. Yet, somehow, beneath the endless grind, something else had begun to grow. Claire still carried skepticism on her back like an extra pack, heavier than any ruck the instructors strapped to her shoulders. But now she carried something else too, a quiet gravity, a presence even the loudest doubters couldn't quite shake. It showed itself during the 20-mile ruck march through the dunes. Packs sagged heavy, weapons dug into shoulders, boots swallowed sand with every step. Turner led as always, his pace punishing, unrelenting. But by mile 10, sweat streamed down his face, his chest rising ragged. He stumbled once, then again. Claire noticed. Without hesitation, she adjusted her pack, quickened her pace, drew alongside him. She didn't speak, didn't gloat, didn't remind him of the nights he'd mocked her. She just steadied her breathing, kept her stride matched to his. By mile 15, Turner's pride was cracking. His legs wobbled. His lips were pale. For a brief moment, when his knees buckled, Claire slid her hand beneath his elbow, holding him upright just long enough to steady his step. He jerked away instantly, pride bristling like barbed wire. But he didn't fall, and he didn't quit. When the march ended, candidates collapsed into the sand, groaning. Turner sat slumped, sweat dripping into his eyes. He didn't look at her, not then. But later in the barracks, his voice was quieter than anyone had ever heard. "You didn't have to do that." Claire's shrug was simple. "Neither did you." It wasn't friendship. Not yet. But it was the first crack in the armor of disdain he'd built around himself. The next test came in darkness. A navigation drill. The group split into pairs, given compasses and red flashlights, sent into miles of dense terrain. Clare moved with Martinez, his humor filling the quiet, easing the weight of exhaustion. "You think the Ghost Division's out here watching us?" he whispered at one point, grinning through the dark. Claire's mouth tugged faintly. "If they are, they're laughing at how slow we're going." Hours crawled. At one checkpoint they found another pair struggling. One candidate limped badly, ankle twisted, face pinched with pain. Claire knelt instantly, assessing, binding the joint tight with a strip of torn fabric. She leaned close, voice steady. "You can finish this. Shorten your stride, lean on him. Don't quit now." The man's eyes flickered with something raw, determination, the spark of belief. He pushed on. When they all reached the finish, he limped across the line, refusing to quit. The instructors said nothing, offered no praise, but the story spread like smoke through the barracks. Doc got him through. She patched him up on the move. By morning, the silence around her was different again. Not quite friendly, not warm, but lighter, watchful. Respect wasn't handed to her, but piece by piece she was earning it. The kill house came next. Wooden walls, narrow halls, targets popping without warning. The instructors barked, speed, precision, no hesitation. Claire's team stacked at the door, adrenaline burning. "Move!" They burst inside. Gunfire cracked, targets dropping. But midway through, Martinez stumbled, boot catching. He fell hard, rifle clattering to the floor. In an instant, Claire pivoted. 2 controlled bursts dropped targets, her body moving without pause. She crouched, yanked him upright, voice sharp. "On your feet." Martinez grinned sheepishly. "Thanks, Doc." They finished slower than expected, but alive. When the horn ended the drill, Turner muttered just loud enough. "Hell of a save." Not mocking this time, not sharp, something else, something closer to recognition. In the mess hall that night, Martinez leaned across the table, smirking. "Doc, you keep this up, we're going to have to actually trust you." The men chuckled. Even Turner's lips twitched into what might have been the beginnings of a smile. Claire didn't laugh. She just lifted her spoon, eating quietly. The faintest trace of satisfaction flickered in her eyes. Still, respect in this world was never a straight line. Doubt returned like shadows. When she stumbled on an obstacle course, Turner shook his head. When she hesitated a beat too long on a breaching drill, someone muttered, "Maybe she's not cut out for it." Each time, Claire answered not with words, but with steadiness. She carried packs heavier than her frame should allow, worked through bruised ribs without limping, patched blisters without complaint, never letting them see weakness. Little by little, the whispers shifted. Not she's slowing us down, but she doesn't quit. Not she's just a medic, but she's one of us. The true shift came in stillness. One afternoon during rare downtime, the men sprawled in shade, water bottles in hand. Martinez, ever the storyteller, leaned back with a grin. "Hey, Doc, tell us that Ghost Division thing again." Claire looked up wary. "It's just a story." "Yeah," he shrugged, "but the way you said it, it stuck. Hell, I think about it when I'm about to quit. Makes me wonder what else is possible." Turner sat nearby, eyes unreadable. He didn't scoff, didn't mock, just drank quietly, gazed thoughtful. For the first time, Claire felt it. Not just tolerance, not silence, respect. That night, lying in her bunk, she whispered again. Only now it wasn't just for herself, not for survival, but for all of them. Ghost Division, 3420. The words no longer belonged to her alone. The final ruck pushed them beyond breaking. 40 miles under crushing loads, sun rising and falling, backs bent, legs screaming. The instructors barked. The bell waited back at camp for anyone willing to quit. Men fell out. Some stumbled to the side, collapsing, surrendering. Claire kept moving, not fast, not at the front, but steady. Her lips whispered it over and over, a prayer carried only for her. Ghost Division, 3420. Ghost Division, 3420. Martinez drifted beside her, his face pale with exhaustion. "You still talking to your ghost, Doc?" She didn't look at him, didn't break pace. "Keeps me moving." His grin was faint, cracked by fatigue. "Hell, keeps me moving too." And then behind them another voice, rough, reluctant, Turner. "Ghost Division, 3420. Claire's chest tightened. She didn't turn, didn't break stride, but she heard it. A whisper at first, then another and another. One by one, the voices joined. Exhausted men, legs trembling, bodies broken, but whispering steady. "Ghost Division, 3420. The mantra had spread. By the time they reached the final stretch, the words weren't hers anymore. They belonged to all of them. The instructors didn't acknowledge it, didn't praise it, didn't even mention it. They never did. But Claire knew. Something had changed. The legend wasn't a story anymore. It had become a lifeline. And she was the one who carried it into the fire. What does victory look like when it isn't loud? For weeks, Claire had endured silence sharpened like knives. Now the silence was different. It wasn't rejection anymore. It was watchfulness, a kind of waiting. The men no longer mocked her when she whispered numbers under her breath, no longer smirked when she steadied herself through another impossible day. They were listening now, even when they pretended not to. Graduation was still weeks away, but the instructors doubled down, pushing every candidate to the edge. Each day started before dawn. Each night ended with bodies collapsing into bunks too exhausted to even dream. The only constant was pain. Blisters became scars, shoulders bruised raw from logs, lungs seared with salt from the endless surf. Turner still tested her, always. He didn't need words anymore. Sometimes it was just the way he glanced sideways when she faltered, waiting to see if she'd break. But each time Claire steadied herself. Each time she rose again. The instructors set them into another urban combat drill, this one harsher than before. Smoke swallowed the mock village, gunfire echoed from hidden speakers, civilians screamed from mannequins painted in fake blood. Chaos. Claire moved through it steady, commanding tourniquets and pressure dressings with the same calm she had used on dusty battlefields half a world away. Her hands didn't tremble. Her voice didn't break. Turner scowled at her efficiency, but he didn't argue this time. Martinez covered her flank automatically, no hesitation. When the horn ended and the smoke thinned, the men slumped against the walls. For once, no one muttered that she had slowed them down. They just sat in silence, catching breath, shoulders touching in a way that no longer excluded her. That night in the barracks, Turner stayed quiet. No jabs, no mockery, just silence. And silence, Claire had learned, could be respect. The days ahead blurred. The instructors introduced new drills meant to break them down further. Hours in freezing surf, bodies shaking with hypothermia, arms locked together in the dark as the Pacific swallowed them. Candidates rang the bell one after another. Claire whispered through chattering teeth, "Ghost Division, 3420. The men beside her heard it. Martinez whispered back, then Turner, then more. Soon the whole line was muttering it, a chorus of broken voices linked arm in arm. Not loud, not shouted, just steady. And together they stayed. Another test came in the kill house. This time the instructors added twists, screaming civilians, fake explosions, shadows meant to disorient. In the chaos, one candidate slipped, rifle jamming, panic rising in his eyes. Claire moved instantly, dropping targets with sharp, measured fire before crouching beside him. "Breathe, fix it. You know how." He blinked, steadied, cleared the jam. By the time they finished, slower than expected but alive, the others glanced her way not with doubt but with something far different: trust. When the horn ended, Turner muttered again, voice low, almost reluctant, "She's steady when it matters." No one argued. Meals became lighter. Martinez teased more often. Even Turner's scowl softened, his silences less sharp, more thoughtful. Still, respect here was never a gift. It was a grind. Every day Claire had to prove herself again, prove that steadiness could outlast doubt. And slowly, brick by brick, she built something none of them could ignore. The final ruck nearly killed them. 40 miles beneath crushing loads, sun rising and falling, legs buckling, bodies collapsing along the trail. The instructors barked. The bell waited, gleaming, back at camp. Claire whispered each step. "Ghost Division, 3420. Ghost Division, 3420. Martinez stumbled beside her, whispering it too. Then Turner, his voice gravel-thick but steady. Then more, one by one, until the whole line carried the mantra, whispering it into the night. The instructors ignored it. They didn't praise, didn't punish. They simply watched, their faces unreadable. But Claire knew. Something had changed. The legend wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to all of them. Graduation arrived in blur and ceremony. Uniforms crisp, brass gleaming, names called one by one. Each man walking forward to receive the trident, the symbol that meant they had endured the impossible. When Claire's name was called, the silence was heavy. She walked forward with calm steps, shoulders squared. The pin was pressed into her palm, heavier than she imagined, not because of the metal, because of what it meant. Every whisper of doubt, every night of silence, every moment she had bitten her tongue instead of answering back, every blister, bruise, scar, all of it carried here to this single moment. For the first time, she allowed herself a rare smile. After the ceremony, the men gathered, no longer candidates but brothers forged in fire. Turner approached her, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes searching for words. "You proved me wrong," he said simply. Claire tilted her head, voice calm. "Wasn't about proving you wrong." "Then what was it about?" She paused, then answered softly, "Proving myself steady when it mattered." He nodded slowly. No banter, no smirk, just acknowledgement. Respect finally, fully given. Years later, the story of Clare Donovan still circled quietly in corners of the teams. Not loud, not celebrated, but whispered during Hell Week when cold threatened to break new candidates, murmured in deserts on nights that stretched too long. Ghost Division, 3420. Not as myth, not as legend, but as reminder that steadiness, patience, and refusal to quit mattered more than noise or bravado. For Claire, it was never about the record itself. It was about what it meant. That dignity didn't shout, it endured. That sometimes the strongest voices were whispers. And sometimes, the most unshakable proof wasn't in medals or stories written down, but in the silence carried forward from one generation to the next. What happens when the silence of training is broken by the reality of war? The first time the helicopter lifted her into a combat zone, Claire felt the vibration in her chest before she felt it in her bones. The rotors thundered, whipping sand into storms below, blinding dust across the night. She sat pressed between Turner and Martinez, gear heavy on her frame, weapon resting across her lap. The smell of fuel, sweat, and adrenaline filled the cabin. The briefing had been short. Village raid, suspected insurgents, possible hostages, intelligence unreliable, the kind of mission where every shadow could be death, every sound a trigger. Turner tapped her shoulder, his eyes sharp even behind the night vision gear. "Stay tight, Doc. This isn't a drill." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. The bird dipped, shuddering as it descended. Dust roared through the open doors. A voice crackled in her headset, 30 seconds. Her hand brushed the edge of her med kit, reassurance in weight. She whispered it then, barely audible over the roar. "Ghost Division, 3420. Turner glanced at her, eyes narrowing, but he didn't scoff. Not now. He nodded once. The helicopter flared, wheels skimming earth. Boots hit dirt. They moved in formation, shadows slipping through the night. Claire followed, heart steady, rifle raised, every nerve alive. The village was silent, too silent. Dogs barked in the distance, then stopped. A door slammed. Somewhere, a child cried before being hushed. They breached, rooms cleared, shadows scattered. Gunfire cracked, sudden and sharp. The air filled with smoke and dust, screams real this time, not recorded. Claire dropped instantly beside the first man hit. Shrapnel across the thigh, blood pumping. Her hands moved before thought, pressure, bandage, tourniquet. "Cover me," she barked. Turner pivoted, laying down fire. Martinez shouted coordinates, movements sharp and controlled. Another explosion rocked the street. Shards of glass rained down. Claire shielded the casualty, teeth clenched. Then she was moving again, dragging him into cover, patching, stabilizing. Her breath whispered steady beneath the chaos. "Ghost Division, 3420. Ghost Division, 3420. The words steadied her hands, kept her focus sharp. Another man went down, Martinez, hit across the shoulder. His eyes widened, more from shock than pain. Claire was already there, sliding beside him. "You're good, hold still." He gritted his teeth. "Don't you dare let Turner patch me up, he'll leave a scar." Even in the middle of fire, she smirked faintly. "You'll live." Bullets shredded walls around them. Turner pressed close, rifle spitting, jaw tight. He looked at Claire once, really looked, and his voice was low, urgent. "You keep us alive, Doc. Don't stop." She didn't. The mission dragged into hours. Hostages recovered. Casualties patched. The village secured. By dawn, when the helicopter lifted them back into the sky, Claire's hands were raw, her uniform soaked with blood, some there, some not. The men sat slumped in exhaustion, eyes hollow. Turner leaned back, head tilted against the vibrating hull, his gaze drifting toward her. He didn't speak, but when his lips moved silently, she saw it. "Ghost Division, 3420. Not mockery, not doubt, respect. The days blurred, missions stacked. Villages, compounds, deserts, mountains. Sometimes the intel was right, sometimes it was wrong, but always the chaos was the same. And always Claire was steady. She learned to fight not for glory, but for seconds. Seconds that bought survival. Seconds that bought one more heartbeat for the man bleeding beneath her hands. Seconds that bought safe passage for a hostage too terrified to move. Every mission etched scars, not all visible. She carried faces with her, men she saved, men she couldn't. In silence, she whispered it each time, before helicopters lifted, before doors breached, before chaos swallowed the night. Ghost Division, 3420. The others whispered it too now. Sometimes Martinez said it with a grin, a joke to ease the edge of fear. Sometimes Turner muttered it under his breath, jaw tight before a mission. It was no longer her mantra alone, it was theirs. But with each mission, the weight of it grew heavier. Because she knew the truth, mantras didn't stop bullets, belief didn't erase death, and no matter how steady her hands, not everyone made it home. One night after a mission that left 2 men zipped in bags, Claire sat alone outside the barracks. The desert was silent, stars spread like shattered glass across the sky. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, face in her hands. Her chest ached, her throat tightened. For once she didn't whisper the words. For once silence pressed in too heavy to break. Turner found her there, sat down beside her without a word. Minutes passed before he spoke. "You carry them, don't you?" Claire didn't look up, didn't answer. "I used to think you were just slowing us down," he said quietly. "Now I know you're the one holding us together." Her eyes stung, she forced her voice steady. "It's not enough, not always." "No," Turner said, his jaw tightening, "but it's more than most can do." They sat in silence, the desert wind cool against their skin. Finally Claire whispered it, not to him, not even to herself, to the men they'd lost. Ghost Division, 3420. The words carried into the night. From that day on, she carried the mantra differently, not just as a shield, but as remembrance. Each mission after, when she whispered the numbers, she wasn't steadying herself alone. She was carrying them all, the fallen, the living, the ones yet to come. The instructors had never spoken the words. The command never acknowledged them. But in the shadows of missions no one outside the teams would ever know, the whisper endured. Ghost Division, 3420. Not as a story, not as a legend, but as a heartbeat in the dark. How many names can one heart hold before it breaks? Claire never counted the faces, never kept a ledger of the men she had saved or the ones she couldn't. But memory doesn't follow rules, it clings, it stalks. It returns in flashes at night when the barracks is quiet, or on helicopters when engines drown out everything but thought. The first face was Martinez's, alive, grinning, shoulder scar fatting where she had stitched it. He teased her endlessly, yet his jokes always came when the team needed them most. The second was Corporal Hayes, 19, too young. She had held his hand while his chest rose shallow, whispering steady until his eyes slipped shut. Then came others. Each mission brought new names, new weight. Claire carried them all, silent as always. On the surface, she was the same, calm, precise, steady when blood soaked the dirt and voices screamed for her hands. She patched, she lifted, she pulled men from fire. Her whisper was always there. Ghost Division, 3420. But when the gunfire ended, when the dust settled, when the adrenaline drained, she sat alone, back pressed against cold walls, and the silence pressed too heavy. Turner saw it first. He had changed since training, less sharp edges, more watchful. He never said much, but his silence now was a different kind, not scornful but protective. One night after a brutal raid, he found her sitting on the steps outside the compound, hands clasped tight, gaze fixed on the horizon. "You're bleeding," he said. She glanced down, surprised. Shrapnel had sliced her arm. She hadn't noticed. "Doesn't matter," she murmured. "It does," he said. Then softer, almost reluctant. "You can't carry all of us if you don't take care of yourself." The words caught her, not because of their truth but because of who said them. Turner, the man who once mocked her as dead weight. She said nothing but allowed him to tape the wound. His hands were rough, clumsy compared to hers, but steady. That night she whispered the mantra again. Only this time Turner whispered with her. The missions blurred. Dust, sweat, blood. Hostages freed, enemies scattered, friends carried out under flags. The mantra spread further. Not just her team, but others who heard it whispered in passing. It became a quiet rhythm through deployments, not shouted, never official but spoken when silence threatened to break men apart. Still, for Claire, it wasn't enough. Because each face stayed. At night she dreamed of them. Hayes, another boy with freckles who'd cracked jokes the day before he died. A man with 3 daughters whose wallet photos she still carried. The whispers steadied her hands in battle, but alone they cut. Martinez noticed too. His grin softened when he caught her staring too long at her hands as if blood still stained them. "You're not a ghost, Doc," he said one evening sitting beside her. "You're still here, still one of us." But she wondered, because sometimes when she whispered the numbers, she didn't feel alive at all. She felt like she was already part of the division she spoke of, a ghost among the living. One mission cemented it. The team was deep in the mountains, hunting a cell that had ambushed a convoy. Snow fell thick, muffling sound, turning the world white. The firefight was sudden, brutal. Echoes cracked across ridges, men sliding in blood against the snow. Claire crawled to one of her own, chest torn open, lungs drowning in red. Her hands pressed down, but she knew. She knew before she even started. Still, she whispered, "Stay with me, stay steady, Ghost Division, 3420. His lips moved, a whisper back, 3420. And then silence. The snow took his last warmth. Claire sat there, hands shaking for the first time in years. Around her, gunfire roared, men shouted, Turner's voice thundered commands. But she heard nothing but the quiet. When they exfiltrated, the helicopter vibrating beneath them, Claire sat against the wall, staring into nothing. Martinez leaned close, whispering, "Doc, you did everything you could." She didn't answer, because she hadn't done enough. She whispered the mantra again, but it sounded hollow, empty. For the first time, it didn't steady her, it broke her. Back at base, she avoided the others, sat alone, silence heavier than ever. Turner found her again. He didn't speak at first, just sat beside her, the way he had on the training field years before. Finally, he said, "You think Ghost Division means perfection, that it means never failing, but you're wrong." She looked at him, eyes raw. "It means showing up," he said. "Even when you're breaking, even when you know you might lose, it means steady doesn't quit, even when steady hurts." His words cut deep. She realized then that the mantra had never been about impossible records. It was about surviving impossibility, about enduring when others quit. That night she whispered it again, not as shield, not as punishment, but as promise. Ghost Division, 3420. The weight didn't vanish, the faces didn't fade, but something shifted. She wasn't carrying them alone anymore. The next mission she walked forward steady again, not unbroken, never unbroken, but still moving. Because sometimes strength wasn't in silence, it was in speaking the words anyway. How do you measure a life lived in silence? Not by medals, not by speeches, not even by stories told loudly at bars or in books. Claire's life was measured differently, in the whispers that carried long after she walked away from the fire. Her deployment stretched across years. Deserts, jungles, mountains. Places maps didn't mark, missions headlines never named. Always the same rhythm. Helicopters lifting, boots hitting dirt, chaos erupting, and her hands steady in the storm. She became the one they wanted nearby when everything fractured. The one they trusted not because she shouted loudest, but because she never faltered. She didn't need to be first through doors or the last one standing tall in victory. She needed only to be steady when blood filled the ground, when panic choked the air, when men whispered prayers they'd never admit. And she was, again and again. But steady doesn't mean unbreakable. The weight never left her. Each face stayed. Each voice haunted the edges of her sleep. She still whispered the mantra before every mission, not as superstition but as remembrance. Ghost Division, 3420. And the others whispered too. Turner, once her fiercest skeptic, now said it before strapping on gear, the numbers steady in his gravel voice. Martinez used it as a grin, a joke, but also as a tether when fear crawled in. Others, younger men who'd never known her struggles in training, picked it up quietly because they heard it whispered by those they trusted most. Soon it wasn't just hers. It wasn't just their team. It was a current moving through units scattered across the world, a quiet thread, unrecorded, unacknowledged, but alive. Claire didn't seek credit. She never told the origin, never explained the number. She let it live as it was, a whisper in the dark, a handhold when the weight pressed too heavy. Her last deployment ended without ceremony. She came home not to parades but to silence, a duffel slung over her shoulder, boots worn, scars hidden beneath sleeves. She walked into her own kitchen, alone, and set her bag down on the floor. The quiet was suffocating. After years of rotors and gunfire, silence pressed heavier than combat ever had. She sat at the table, hands clasped, staring at the wall. And she whispered it again. Ghost Division, 3420. Only now, she wasn't steadying herself for battle. She was reminding herself she had survived. Civilian life was no easier. Crowds pressed too close. Small talk felt hollow. She carried herself quietly, blending into rooms unseen. Sometimes people asked if she'd served. She always shrugged, offering little. But late at night, when news broke of another mission halfway across the world, she sat in silence, whispering steady, knowing somewhere, men she'd trained with were whispering too. Years later, during a quiet reunion, Martinez found her. His grin was softer now, his hair touched with gray. "Doc," he said, hugging her tight, "you'll never believe it. I heard new recruits saying it. Your words, Ghost Division, 3420, they don't even know where it started. They just know it means don't quit, stay steady, be more than the moment." Claire smiled faintly, lines creasing at the corners of her eyes. "It was never mine to own." "Still," Martinez said, his voice soft, "you carried it long enough for the rest of us to believe it." That night she sat on her porch, stars stretched across the sky, the world quiet around her. She thought of Turner, still serving, his silence softer than it once had been. She thought of the men she had saved and the ones she hadn't. She thought of Hayes, too young, whispering the mantra with his last breath. She closed her eyes and whispered one last time, "Ghost Division, 3420. The words no longer felt like shield or burden. They felt like release. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply endures. It simply acts. And long after Claire Donovan's footsteps faded, long after her voice was gone, the whisper carried on. Through training fields where new candidates fought exhaustion, through deserts where dust swallowed everything, through nights when fear pressed too heavy and silence threatened to break men apart. Ghost Division, 3420. Not a legend, not a story. A promise that even when you are breaking, you can be steady. That even when silence surrounds you, you are not alone. That sometimes the strongest voices are whispers.